Hi, Rachel. Welcome to the Empower Nutrition Podcast. How are you?
I am terrific. Erin, thank you so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to talk to you today.
Same. Thank you so much for being on. I think we have a lot to talk about.
I think we have a lot in common too, which is pretty fun.
I think so as well. I mean, we just met, but I'm already getting vibes that maybe we're both neither. So I'm also getting a doctorate. I mean, you have your doctorate, obviously, but I'm almost at the end of mine, but yet also not. I think there's like a whole world of kind of that's more traditional, more conventional, more like ultra research based, which ties in well with conventional healthcare. Then there's this sort of like other side of the coin that's integrative medicine, functional medicine, and all that world, and non-traditional approaches. And I think some people are kind of like fully in one camp, and I see big problems with like both camps. So
Yeah,
just a hater.
I definitely have always had a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
My background is my more recent background is in the sort of more traditional academic space, right? So it's, really classically trained in human subjects, trials, and specifically I look at muscle and supplementation and performance and healthy aging. But before that, I was, a wellness professional. I was in the fitness and wellness world. I like to tell the story that I started, as a personal trainer when I was 18 years old at Bally's Total Fitness. And if you remember what Bally's is, that means you are of a certain vintage. And then more recently, have sort of pivoted my career back into having a part in both spaces again, where my current work is with a company called Restore Hyperwellness, where I'm the director of their scientific research arm, specifically a division called Restore Labs. And this is a space where we're really applying the traditional academic scientific, inquiry into some more complementary therapies. So things like IV micronutrients and, complementary therapies like red light therapy and compression and infrared sauna and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, really trying to figure out how all of these things work. And so, I think people probably know me best if you were to ask them as kind of a myth buster, but I am an open-minded myth buster. And I like the idea that there are a lot of things that we just don't know yet. And I'm excited to be a part of answering a lot of questions in that space.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think it's so tricky for just the everyday person to navigate the difference between what's something that's truly founded in science versus something that really hasn't been thoroughly researched. So it could potentially be true, and based off of this person's experience, say in clinical care or in a research setting, this is what they're saying is their belief of what's real. And then there's just straight quackery that's like, it sounds just as good as the other two things, but it has been researched, it has been studied, and what they're saying does go against the research. I mean, it's just so hard to suss that out, I think, in today's world.
It is really hard for the general population because reading science is also really hard too, right? Like you can't get the real intricacies of the scientific studies by just reading an abstract, which is mostly what people have access to. And the concept that you were just describing there, I like to describe it as the absence of evidence versus the evidence of absence, right?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of the therapies that, we might talk about or that I am investigating right now really do suffer from an absence of evidence. So this is we just haven't studied that yet, or we haven't studied it in a specific population. So if we look at, the world that I come from, which is supplementation and muscle and performance, the majority of those studies have been done in young, healthy men or in mice, right? And so applying those concepts to older women or to menopausal women or to older men or to humans in general gets really sticky, right?
Yeah.
And then the opposite side of that is exactly what you said, is the evidence of absence, where, hey, we've studied that and that's not what's going on. And, there's a lot of wellness myths that need to kind of be,
need to die
a little bit. We actually have studied it. And so, we have an answer to that question. And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time trying to sort of navigate those two spaces.
Yeah, same. It's so important. I mean, kind of work with all types of people, but generally our most common person that works with us is going to be a woman, sort of maybe between the ages of like 30 to 60, who gets exposed to so much on, say, Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube, and magazines, at the checkout counter. It's just everywhere. And so I'm wondering, maybe like tell me your thoughts around that population in terms of, they're non-classical in terms of what, when you say performance, I think of more like, okay, an elite athlete or a special forces person. But to me, I have a background in performance nutrition as well. And I apply that thinking a lot to this population, because I find that they really do need to, specifically, I think often like increase their lean mass, this especially. But tell me your thoughts on that population in terms of what you think is like missing maybe in their big picture of their health.
Yeah. So I think the first challenging thing goes right to this idea of, absence of evidence, right? So we have very little data on women between the ages of 30 and 60, and even less data on women that are postmenopausal, usually after the age of 60. And that's really frustrating, I think, to a lot of women, because I don't know about you, but the most I really had growing up on learning about my body was like in health class in 7th grade, right?
Yeah.
And so between those two spaces of not being educated and then also not having good, clear data, it leaves this gigantic hole with a lot of questions for women that are going through some really important physiological transitions in those time periods in their life.
Yeah.
And so
having
women
babies,
are smart.
Perimenopause. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They have questions. They recognizing, that their bodies are changing. And because of this big hole we have, people are searching for answers. And again, I come from the wellness background. I think that generally people are in a place of empathy and of caring, and they are trying really hard to help other people by giving answers. And 90% of the answers that we have right now are just not based in any evidence, because the evidence doesn't exist. So it's a challenge. And I'll give you some sort of sobering statistics. When we look at the performance literature, only about 6% on last count of the performance literature. So this is, muscle performance, physical performance, athletic performance in women. Only 6% of all of the studies were done in women alone. And it's funny because I've been, submitting grants to study women. And, when my population in my studies is just females, I will inevitably get reviews back from my reviewers that say, why do you want to study just women? And I'm like, what? Because I want to understand what's going on in a woman's body. And
half the world population, no big deal.
Right.
Maybe we should research them.
And the second question that I always get is, well, are you going to include men and compare them to men? And I'm like, no, I don't want to compare to men. I want to understand what's happening in women. And oh, by the way, 94% of the data is in men. We've got a pretty good understanding of what's going on there. Can we please look at these different, transitions in life and these different physiological changes that are happening for females? And I'll give you one more, even more sobering statistic. This is one that I constantly go back to double check that this is actually the statistic, because it blows my mind every time. 0.1%. Let me say that again. 0.1% of data in neurological studies, so in the brain, are done in women alone.
Really?
Yeah. So there's studies that look at men and women together, but ones that look specifically at women. And so this is really where, when you think about all of the, the social media posts or the headlines or whatever that, you're at the checkout counter, it's really hard to wade through that information, especially as a normal average human that's just trying to get through your day. But even as a scientist, as a researcher, because there is no answer yet, because it hasn't been investigated. And so I think that's where women, particularly in this space, get really frustrated, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Because the data, it's coming, but it doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, exactly. What would you say are some, by what you just said, you might not be able to answer this, but when you think about the performance research that does exist, that's mostly been performed on men, what do you think are some of the main sort of like findings and recommendations that come from that really don't serve women? Like everything's on the table. So is it I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe just go with that of like, what do you think are some of the things that really do differ between men and women in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the recommendations tend to trend in the same direction, right? So
Mm.
you think about the sort of foundational performance.
Like you need protein.
Exactly. So you need protein, you need lean skeletal muscle. And, I've been studying skeletal muscle for over a decade, almost 15 years now. I'm biased, but I'm right. Skeletal muscle is the tissue of healthy aging. So those things are going to trend in the same direction. When we start to look at things that I think are interesting that are starting to emerge right now is that if we stay with muscle for a minute, we see that male and female muscle ages differently than you would perhaps expect. For example, we're all on the treadmill, if you will, the literal and metaphorical treadmill of, should we be doing high intensity interval training? Should we be doing sprint interval training? Should we be doing zone 2, right? All of these things that apply, I believe, differently to males and females. And this goes back to even animal data, right? So
yeah.
Interestingly, when you look at females, we are endurance machines, right? We are built to endure. When you look under at our skeletal muscle, yeah, right. All ways we are built.
I took that way too, like here we go.
When we look at skeletal muscle, and again, this is sort of, conserved across species, is that on average, females tend to have aerobic, endurance fibers, these type 1 fibers. And we have less, although still significantly a large amount of the type 2 power strength fibers. That is oftentimes reversed in males and females. So males will tend to have more by proportion of these strength and power fibers. And so what we see, which is really fascinating, and this was from early data that I worked on when I was back as a graduate student, is we will see that as you age, that power and strength metric is a really important component to whether or not you are able to essentially function as an older adult. And by that, I mean, 70s, 80s, 90s. Interestingly, when I was in graduate school, I studied skeletal muscle and vitamin D specifically. And I remember sitting in a lecture with one of the professors that was talking about how vitamin D and calcium are so important for bone, right? And that's what we learned way back in the day, is that vitamin D calcium is so important for bone and for teeth. And the metric that kept coming up over and over again was, if you don't have enough vitamin D, you don't have enough calcium that's been absorbed, when you fall, you break bones. And I raised my hand and I said, it's interesting that we're breaking bones, and I understand why that is happening, but why are people falling in the first place? Like, what is going on that is causing them to make contact with the ground? And so some of my earliest studies when I was, back in the sarcopenia lab at Tufts, is we were trying to understand what goes first, the strength and sort of endurance of that muscle, or the ability to move that muscle very quickly. And that's what we found, is that the ability to sort of move fast. And that's an interaction between the nerve and the skeletal muscle. And it's particularly pronounced in females as they get older. And one of the suspicions here is, if you are an endurance machine for your whole life and you don't train that power, strength, speed element, when that muscle starts to inevitably decay with older age, those are the fibers that tend to go first. So these women might be able to walk around all day in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, but when they go to put their arm out to catch themselves, if they have slipped on ice or tripped, they're not able to sufficiently, stop their fall, and so they break their bones. And so this is something that I think is really important and different between men and women. To come back to your original question, is yes, we know muscle is critically key for healthy aging. But what that muscle actually looks like and the makeup of that muscle might be particularly unique between men and women. And women, as we age, need to make sure that we're paying attention to those strength and power muscles so that we have sort of a healthy trajectory as we get older.
So interesting. It sounds like you maybe are alluding to, you not only think about, okay, making sure you ensure that you have your needed amount of lean mass, but also you're thinking about that neurological system that controls it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, interestingly as well, when we start to look at the women and the aging trajectory, this is also going to be dramatically affected, as we were just talking about a moment ago, between the transitions that happen between perimenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. And when we look at the changes of hormones that females have, you go from having an abundance of a hormone like estrogen. Post-menopause, you have almost no estrogen, and that's critically important for making sure that your skeletal muscle is robust and overcoming that reduction in a hormone like estrogen, among others. That's sort of the easy target, but that is challenging for women in a very unique way than men, because they're obviously not going to have that major transition in their midlife. And before we move on, something to also consider is, we think about this where, people say, oh, I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm 60. Should I start resistance training? Yes, 100%. You should start resistance training. If you don't do it
20
yet,
now. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So when we look at that data and we start to see that decline of muscle with aging, particularly in women, we see that about every decade, we will have a reduction of somewhere between 3 to 5% of our skeletal muscle mass as females. And it starts at age 30. It starts at age 30. So if we don't have this reserve of these type 2 power strength fibers starting at a young age, when we start to see these declines, it's going to be exponentially more detrimental if we haven't been doing these strength and power routines at a younger age. So start with your daughters, like get going. I mean, everybody get going now. If 20 years ago was the best day to start, today is the second day.
So it's the second best day. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what do you think it is? I mean, I feel like it's just so, first of all, so few women know about this problem. It's like a truck coming down the freeway towards them. The science is there. We know you're going to lose lean mass. We know you have, just by virtue of your gender, huge risk of falls, hip fractures, morbidity and mortality related to that, sarcopenia. They're not strength training. They don't seem to know. No, it doesn't seem like people are telling them how important it is. Or even if they kind of catch wind of it, it seems like they have a really hard time getting going with it. Do you think that's the case?
I think it is. I think it's multifold. So I think, yes, you're totally right that the data is new, although incredibly convincing, right? So there's something there. And because this data, particularly in women and strength, is newer, and we go back, let's call it 20, 30 years, again, dating ourselves as a certain vintage. You remember like the Jane Fondas of the world, or
hey, I remember my mom watching Jane Fonda. Yeah. How about that? I'm sure you do.
Suzanne Summers. I'm aging.
Looking cute on her VHS tape.
And the VHS tape, exactly. Women were told to do more sort of like gentle aerobic exercise, right? Yes. And that wasn't based on any,
it's like a cultural
malintent, right? They weren't saying like you do strength training. It was just kind of what people did. And, there's this whole diet culture component too, where it was like, why do we exercise? We exercise to burn calories. Aerobic exercise is great for burning calories. But now we're starting to also realize that exercise is critically important for things beyond losing weight. And this is where I think there's going to be a pretty significant paradigm shift, where we're seeing, oh, you should move your body for a million other reasons besides calorie burning.
Yeah. What do you think about, I'm just thinking more about like male focused research, things like fasted exercise for women, time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting for women, low carb ketogenic diets for women. There isn't a lot of research, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, there's not a lot of research in general on everything that you just called out. I will say that there's interesting data that for the majority of the research that you're talking about has been done in a mixed cohort of males and females. So there's been very little on, studies that are done just in females or even comparing males and females. So often with these, like time restricted feeding or the ketogenic diet, these, are not only new, but the studies tend to be fairly small. Yeah. And if you know about, clinical trial research or working with, doing some kind of an intervention like a diet or something like that, they have to be particularly powered, meaning you need to have enough people to really run these statistical analyses at an appropriate way or in an appropriate way. And so they haven't really been powered to compare males and females, but that doesn't mean that we can't sort of infer physiologically what could potentially happen in a female that is different than a male. And so when we look at the time restricted feeding, for example, the way that, or intermittent fasting, as it's sort of, being tossed around in the world. Yeah. When we look at that data, we see that intermittent fasting is not being implemented on the street, if you will, in the same way that it is in the research studies. Yeah. So when you look at the research studies, they tend to restrict feeding. So it's called time restricted eating or time restricted feeding, TRE or TRF. And usually what they'll do in the majority of the studies is they will have people actually eat earlier in the day, and they will restrict their feeding from somewhere around 7 o'clock in the morning until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The way that it is being interpreted
skip breakfast.
You got it, is to skip breakfast, right? And so, there's all this talk, I just mentioned, estrogen as a hormone, but cortisol is another one where we really think about cortisol is a stress hormone. And if you add extra stress to your body, including not eating, you're going to have detrimental effects downstream. And so this idea of skipping breakfast is probably not particularly great in general when we look at those studies, and we can tie it to circadian rhythms, which is really where that's the strongest data is. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. But when we look specifically at training with, whether you're fasted or you have eaten or something like that, we tend to see that there is likely differences in males and females, where females tend to train better and also have better outcomes if they are training fed, just simply because of the differences in our skeletal muscle and our metabolism. Yeah. Males tend to do all right if they are training, let's say early in the morning without eating breakfast. It does seem to be particularly with carbohydrates that women do better with their training, better with their recovery when they have these fuels on board. The other thing, and I'll pull it back to just a second, is I said a moment ago about the circadian rhythm. So what we're seeing with time restricted feeding is everybody's kind of using this as a weight loss strategy. It works. You cut out a meal, you cut out 400 or 500 calories, you're going to weight. Like that's just, math at the end of the day. But what we're actually noticing in the literature is that if you have these, eating windows earlier in the day, what it tends to do is to stop your feeding before you go to bed, right? So look at the circadian data, and circadian loosely, when we look at circadian rhythms, means you're awake in the light and you're asleep in the dark. Right. And your body and your hormonal fluctuations are kind of paired to that light and dark exposure. Yeah. And so when we look at that time restricted feeding studies, and we see that people start eating earlier in the day and they stop eating, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours before they go to bed, they sleep better, they have better metabolic outcomes, they might lose a little bit of weight, although the most interesting data, I think, is in these other metrics that are so important for overall health and the number on the scale. And so when we see that, it's really interesting, because what it's allowing you to do essentially before you go to bed is rather than having to choose rest or digest when you are sort of in this relaxation phase before you go to bed, your body can actually choose, I'm going to rest instead of digest your food. Yeah. Allows all of these beneficial outcomes to happen overnight. So I would say time restricted eating, think about it more as, sort of like shifting your meals away from your bedtime. And I would say, think about it more from a metabolic health perspective rather than a weight loss perspective. Yeah, absolutely. I think so few people know about that body of research. It seems to be becoming pretty clear that there's this pretty tight communication between,
your metabolism and your circadian rhythm such that your body knows what time of day it is, and it's going to do different things with exact same food depending on whether you're eating it during the daytime versus the night.
Exactly.
And they can, yeah.
You think about the you just nailed it completely, where we think about how your metabolism is tied to the light and dark. People right now, I mentioned cortisol just a moment ago, and we know that cortisol is a stress hormone, and we want to make sure that we keep our stress under control, right? We don't want to have too much stress, but actually it is really important for your body to recognize stress inducing molecules in your body, like the hormone cortisol, because it indicates you need to be awake, you need to be alert, you need to pay attention. And to your point of, when we're eating according to our circadian rhythms, all of these hormones are potentially pulsed throughout the day or the night according to a circadian effect. And cortisol is a beautiful example. Yeah. So when we look at cortisol and we're testing it, we have to be so careful about when we test it during the day, because it has really specific times. When you test first thing in the morning, your cortisol is going to be really low. You look 30 minutes later and your cortisol has a very natural and important spike, because you've just woken up and it wants to be alert and it wants to be paying attention. And then eventually it will start going down throughout the day. And I will have people that come to me and say, "Oh, I tested my cortisol. It's so high." And I was like, "Well, when did you test it?" "Oh, about 9 in the morning. And I just got there." And they're like, I was fasted and I woke up at, like 8 o'clock that morning. And I was like, "Well, yeah, obviously your cortisol is going to be high because that's what it's supposed to be doing." Right. And so this is something that we have to really pay attention to as well. And it is likely, again, coming back to your original question of the differences between males and females, while the pattern might be similar between males and females, depending on what we do earlier in the day, eating or not eating, whether or not we're training or we're not training, whether or not we're doing strength training or aerobic training, all of these things are going to interact together. We want to be really careful about being super reductionist about either the markers or the the patterns that we're paying attention to, because they're all really going to work together at the end of the day.
I really wish I had $1 for every time. So we will collect like cortisol curves across the day. That's what we like to see because of what you're talking about. If you get a 1 point, it's like, who knows what's going on. But when you get the curve, you get a good idea. We'll often combine that with CGM data. So what's the blood sugar across full, several days of 24 hours a day. It's seeing the blood sugar. And I just wish I had $1 for every woman that is eating really low carb during the day, exercising fasted, time restricted feeding, doing all the kind of like man research things, and has really poor blood sugar control, especially at night. She'll just be riding it like 110, 120 all night. Her hemoglobin A1C will be pre-diabetic. She can't lose weight. It's like, I just don't think that works. I think women do, like you said, do better with consistent complex carbohydrates, maybe even starting before your workout, that prevents you from having to get into gluconeogenesis, where you're mobilizing cortisol to make new blood sugar because of the lack of carbohydrate intake. And it's just not even what I wanted to think. Because I used to be like kind of hardcore, man research world, and just like seeing hundreds of women and their data, it's like, actually think women like carbs.
Yeah, women love carbs. You know what else loves carbs? Your brain.
Yeah.
Your brain uses carbs pretty much exclusively as a fuel. It might use a little ketone here or there if you're making it. But if you are, constantly having brain fog, and like you said, can't lose weight, you feel like you're watching your numbers kind of fluctuate all over the place, you're probably tired, dehydrated, or you need some carbs on board.
Yeah, it's paradoxical because they're seeing all the things, and so they're like, well, what the heck? I'm already intermittent fasting. I'm already eating low carb. I'm already doing fasted exercise, and I'm still struggling with my metabolism and my weight. And it's like, maybe that's not the right thing for you.
And the alternative right now, to your point, you just mentioned this idea of gluconeogenesis, which is, for people that don't know that term, it's your body using different components of fuel to create or break down stores of glycogen for carbohydrates, because you want a certain amount of sugar, blood sugar, glucose in your bloodstream. And when we go on these super, super, super high protein diets, which everybody is on a kick on right now, and I'm all for the protein, like we got to build that muscle, ladies, but there is
go preach, go. I'm with you. Go.
You got to be careful because your
Yeah.
body is, I just mentioned a moment ago, your brain is going to scavenge for glucose, and your body has low blood glucose. It's going to start to use other fuel sources in order to create the fuel that the most important organ in your body needs, your brain. And so I find this really interesting as well, as if, we've been on all these low carb diets forever and ever and ever. If for whatever reason you don't have protein, which is going to be the major macronutrient that will be turned into sugar, your body can't turn fat into sugar, but it can use protein. If for whatever reason you don't have enough protein on board, you haven't eaten enough today, it comes right back to my favorite tissue, is the place it's going to go looking for that fuel is going to be your skeletal muscle, and it will start to break it down. And you might be in the gym working out as hard as you can. You're like, why is my muscle not getting bigger? Why am I so tired? What's going on? Why is my blood sugar all over the place? It's because you're not giving the body the fuel that it needs. And when your body doesn't have the fuel that it needs, it's going to go looking for it. And the place that your body is going to go looking for fuel, if you don't have enough sugar on board, is going to be those muscles. So think about this. If you are doing fasted exercise in the morning, let's say you are strength training, you are doing those high intensity intervals, which are going to be anaerobic, looking for that glucose for anaerobic metabolism. If you are strength training or working out really hard first thing in the morning and you haven't eaten, ladies, and you're like, I really want to build muscle, I want to make sure that I'm building that lean tissue, and you don't have fuel on board, particularly carbohydrates, your brain is going to go looking for them. And all that work you're trying so hard to do with your muscles is going to be futile at the end of the day, because your body is going to go looking for fuel before it's going to start to build that tissue. So fasted exercise, not a good idea.
Yeah, I'm with you. So let's say I'm eating a pretty balanced, like sufficient protein diet, complex carbohydrates distributed across the day, healthy fats, not a lot of refined carbohydrates or processed.
So you're nailing it. You're nailing it. You're already nailing it.
I'm doing it. I'm getting in the gym. I'm lifting 3 or 4 times a week, heavy to fatigue. I'm getting stronger. Let's talk supplements. I know this is a big area of specialty for you. Should I just completely run away because they're not FDA? The whole thing you always hear is like, oh my gosh, they're not FDA like regulated. It's like horrible for you. Or should I just like believe every Instagram ad I see and buy like 50,000 green powders? Like, what should I do?
Yeah, this is such a good question. And I think it's super important. And the answer is somewhere in the middle, right?
Shocker.
Always. So I am a believer. I'm a researcher of and a believer in the use of strategic supplementation, right? So I don't think you should be taking everything willy-nilly and, pounding down 32 pills in the morning. But I do think that there's good reason to supplement the diet. So I always start right away with a multivitamin, right? So if you're doing everything, but you're also exercising really hard, a multi is just a great way to make sure that you are topping off all of the nutrients that you need. And there's really good literature. So in the last 5 years or so, I've been doing a bunch of work with war fighters and with, we call them tactical athletes. I know you talk about it a lot and you work with this population as well. Specifically with females, we see that a multivitamin during basic training, and this has been sort of shown a couple of times, is when you are ramping up that training like crazy, helps with musculoskeletal injuries, keeps those rates lower, helps with recovery and performance. So just making sure that you have enough nutrients on board as you are breaking your body down, I think is critical. Yeah. You don't need to go crazy. 100% of your daily value is going to do the trick, right? So we're just topping things off. If you've got your protein and you got your complex carbs and your berries, and you're making sure that you get all the things that you need. So I really like just a multi at the start of the day. And then adding on to that some things, and we talked about a couple of them already. I'm always a big proponent of vitamin D supplementation. And I know that this is kind of, the literature is a little bit all over the place. And I sort of take a step back oftentimes with vitamin D, and I have to look at the literature over and over again and really think about, like, who are they studying? in what context are they studying it? And so I think about myself, I, have I grew up in New England. And we know in the literature, if you're above a certain latitude, you can't make vitamin D in your skin during the winter time. So between the months of about October to April, the wavelength of light is not strong enough to make the vitamin D in your skin. And so when we think just practically about that, right? Like adding a D during the wintertime is a really important sort of fail-safe to make sure that you are getting enough of this essential nutrient. And we know it is critically essential if your body is able to make it all by itself, right?
Yeah.
So we want to make sure, you get your D, particularly in the wintertime, up to about 4,000 IUs per day. You can pair that with a calcium if you are worried about bone. The other thing to pair it with, which I just think is awesome, is an omega-3, right?
Yeah.
So take that unsaturated fat. We know unsaturated fat is essential in the diet. Essential means you must eat it because you can't make it.
Yeah.
Omega-3s are critically important for antioxidants, for brain health, for heart health. And the great thing about pairing it with a D is a fat soluble vitamin. So you need a little bit
together.
That in the same
Besties.
pill. Yeah, exactly. Down it, and you are getting two really great things and making sure that your D is actually getting absorbed. So that's where I start with, is like multi D omega. That for me is kind of like the starter stack.
Totally. I'm with you. Yeah.
And then after that, you can start to dabble a little, right? So if you are somebody that is sore or you have an injury, we see things like, tart cherry, beetroot, turmeric can be really helpful. The tart cherry could also be particularly helpful for recovery and for sleep. So that can be a nice one. The others that I look at for women particularly that are really interesting that are coming out right now is creatine. So we're seeing some really, really interesting data. Creatine was sort of like the bro supplement forever, right? So it was the one that all
I miss a day. That's call me a bro, but you can pry it on my cold dead hands.
Yeah, totally. Like every female was so afraid to take it because they're like, I don't want to get bulky. It's really hard for women to get big and bulky.
I've been trying for decades.
Yeah, exactly.
Still not there. So I don't think it happens on accident.
Yeah. Totally. And so we see with creatine, again, it's really, really helpful for creating those powerful fibers that we want early on in life for women and we want to maintain through the lifespan. That's what creatine does. It helps you to lift a little bit heavier and a little bit stronger. And the other thing that's really fascinating that's coming out right now about creatine is that it is used by the brain as well as an energy source. Yeah. And so with women, we see that the phosphocreatine stores, which are where creatine is used in an energy metabolism in your body, decline not only with age, but also more rapidly than they do in men. So they're declining not only in your skeletal muscle, but also in your brain. And so if you are somebody that's, 30, 40, 50 years old and you're like, oh, like I can't recall things as fast. I can't, I feel like I'm not moving. My brain isn't moving as quickly. We're seeing some really interesting mental health and cognitive health outcomes with creatine supplementation in women. So 3 to 5 grams a day. No need to do a loading protocol. Something like that is something that's making a difference one way or the other. Doesn't really matter during the day when you take it. It's an energy precursor. So it's going to sort of like accumulate in your muscles and your other tissues like your brain, regardless of when you take it. But I really like that one for women. And I think the data is becoming more and more strong.
We are so like-minded.
I told you, I said I feel like we have a lot in common.
We could tell it from minute number 1. We just knew we had the same top supplement list. So somehow we saw in each other's eyes.
Good spirits. We can always find each other.
Totally with you on it. And go anywhere you want with this. But I love how I saw on some of your content, you talk about like sort of like wellness BS. So like maybe still on the theme of supplements. What are some of the biggest hitters that you'll see of like, people keep getting sold on this, and I really think it's wellness BS.
Yeah, I think, particularly with supplements, there is a lot that's coming on the market right now that is they're making a lot of big claims, and you should be really careful about big claims with supplementation, period. Like anytime you supplement, you're looking for marginal gains, right? Like you're not going to completely revolutionize your world with supplements here or there. You're going to get a little bit of a boost or a little bit of an impact, but you're not going to be really changing the game in a major way. So I feel like that is number one. If you're looking for a miracle, like start with the foundation, the basics first, like exactly what you just said, Erin, making sure you get the protein, you get the fiber, you get those essential fats during the day. If you're not there, the supplements aren't going to matter.
There's no cheat. There's no cheat code.
There's no cheat code. I like to say you got to bake the cake before you put the frosting on, right? Like you burn that cake, or it's like,
although you could just eat frosting.
Yeah, totally.
Just kidding.
It's still soggy in the middle. Like there ain't no amount of buttercream you can put on that to make it better, right?
Yeah, just a handful of buttercream doesn't work. You need the cake.
No, exactly. Even the really good cream cheese frosting, it doesn't work on an underbaked or a burned cake. So bake the cake first. If you're looking for a miracle, look somewhere else. Supplementation is not going to be your miracle. Look for marginal gains in supplementation.
Yeah.
The one that's driving me bananas right now, are these ones that are pretending to be GLP-1.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'm with you. I know. It was like for so long, it was all the greens powders, but no, now it's the GLP-1 fakes. They're horrible.
Fakes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is for anybody that has not been paying attention to this narrative. So GLP-1 pharmaceutical therapy is, the Ozempics, the Wegovy's, the Zepbounds, and the Mounjaros.
The prescription medications. Yes.
Semaglutide, if you're talking about Ozempic, and if you're talking about Zepbound, you're talking about tirzepatide.
Yeah.
So these are injectable medications. You inject them subcutaneously, and they work for, they were originally designed actually for type 2 diabetes medication to control blood sugar. And this was about 20, 30 years ago now. And people have been using these therapies consistently for if they have a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And what they found in the study of these particular pharmaceuticals was that weight loss was kind of a happy side effect for a lot of people. And we know that, weight loss goes hand in hand with the controlling of blood sugar. And so they found that potentially through this weight loss, we were having these beneficial downstream effects. And, your body produces this GLP-1 in your GI tract. So it's a little peptide that your body produces, and it essentially communicates to your brain and to your pancreas and to other organs to say that you're full. So it increases this feeling of satiety. And so when you go on these GLP-1 injections, you lose weight essentially because people say that it quiets the food noise in their brain, right? So they feel when they're eating that they feel a little bit fuller, a little bit sooner, so they won't overeat. They won't sort of like put their hand into the Reese's peanut butter cup, or, 3 or 4 times, that they'll stop with just the one. And so, of course, there's a whole bunch of wellness folks that are trying to make money that are doing these, like dupes on GLP-1s. And you can find them. I've been, advertised too on my social media for all these new products that are coming along the line. And it's like, oh, this is a GLP-1. It'll say something like GLP-1 or something like that on the bottle. And if you flip it over, you look at what's in them. It's typically some herbal concoction that is not GLP-1, for the record. So if you get the oral supplement pill, this is not the same molecule at all. It's not in the bottle.
Well, even the medication isn't GLP-1. It stimulates it, but it is true that some herbs do stimulate GLP-1, but in orders of magnitude less than these medications.
Exactly. So the medications are the GLP-1 receptor agonists, right? So it's a molecule that looks exactly like GLP-1, and it binds like GLP-1 does. And so, you're putting this like super, super mega high dose into your system. When you take these pills, they might, as you just said, Erin, increase your natural production of GLP-1. But here's the other really interesting thing, and the difference between these two therapeutics as well, is the GLP-1 that you inject is long lasting. So it'll circulate around for about 7 days. Yeah, which is why you inject once a week on the 7th day. When you produce the GLP-1 naturally in your body, whether it's because you've just eaten, which your body will produce GLP-1, you've eaten, tells your brain, I'm full, stop eating. You produce it in tiny amounts. And if you take this supplement and it naturally induces some kind of GLP-1 secretion, you produce it in tiny amounts, but the half-life of the GLP-1 that you produce naturally is somewhere between an hour and 2. So you're actually, you're not circulating around nearly the same amount of concentration, and it also is going to be gone within an hour after your body naturally produces it. So this is one that I feel like,
Yeah,
don't
it's such a scam
on this team. That's such a scam. Exactly. It's the right way. People are just hopping on this bandwagon. And it comes back to this idea. It always kind of grosses me out of, I'm not, a diet culture or an eating disorder specialist, but it's the one thing about the wellness industry that I'm just like, team, can we just move on from this, please? This idea that we always need to be making ourselves smaller. We always need to be on a diet. We always need to be thinner.
Yeah.
When I think about muscle and training, like I'm thinking about like, how can I live to be like 80, 90, like really strong and increase my health span, not my waist span. I don't really care about that so much.
Spend a time sitting down with any grandparent. Like, what do they care about?
Yeah.
Totally. They're not like, hey, how am I going to look in my bathing suit? They want to be able to run around with their grandkids. They want to be out of a hospital and mobile and able to do, enjoy the retirement that they worked for decades to like make it to. It's like
be able to actually walk on the beach and in those deep sands and play with their grandkids. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just really wish that women connected that future more to the need for really working at their lean mass, because as you said, it's hard to get, and it will like, and you're going to lose it like very quickly starting in your 30s. So if you don't work at it, so it's not something to just like, leave by the wayside. It's critical.
Yeah, it's this idea, the other buzzword right now that kind of drives me bananas. And I work in this space. The appointment that I have at Stanford is in the Center for Longevity, but this word of longevity, right? It kind of like, it's a little bit like nails on a chalkboard for me, because I'm like, do you really want more years in your life, or do you want more life in your years, right? Like that's the thing that I'm just like, how do we change the narrative from one of two places where we're either like, I need to look good right now, like God, who cares what happens later on in life, or like, I just need to squeak out 2 or 3 or 4 more years. I'm like, how can we, change that narrative? This is the way that I think about it. And I feel like everybody needs to have this like long-term plan, right? If you're talking about longevity, you got to play the long. This is what I like to think about. So this is how I want to go out, is I'm a skier, right? And I love being outside in the winter. I'm like a cold person, like wrap me up, put me out in the snow. I love it. And so this is my idea. I want to live to 96. I've got 2 great grandparents that live to 96.
Okay. I was like, that's an ultra specific number, but okay.
Very, very specific. So 96 is my goal. This is how I want to go down. I want to go out on the mountain. I just want to like take this like ripper of a run, like just really good one at 96, right? When I get to the bottom, I want to have a beer, because that's like the best time of day. Like you finish at the end of the day.
I basically ski for that reason. For
that 100%. Just tastes so good at the end of the day. And then I want to go back to my cabin, and I want to lay down, and I want to take a nap, and I don't want to wake up, right? Like that's how I want to go down, right? And like that's how I think about this when I think about the muscle and how I'm eating and what supplements I'm taking. I'm not thinking about it from the perspective of, if I could just get to 104, or if I could just, fit into these jeans one more time. Like I'm thinking I'm in the longevity space, right? Like I'm thinking about the long game, and that's the goal, is how do I make it to that run at age 96?
Yeah. The work you're doing is so important, because I think if everyone paints their goals, it's something along those lines of like being healthy till the end, vital till the end, and then like peaceful death. And yet the actions you see people taking don't align with that. And so I think there's a lot to that. Lack of correct information is one of the primary issues. I think there's also just our environment that kind of like pulls us away from what we even know is right is, I think, the other main thing that's even harder to deal with. But at least you're fighting the good fight on like good information. So good job.
I hope so. I have like a little tiny corner of the world where I'm trying to a dent, but we'll see.
Hey, all of us have to push our little amount that we can, and eventually it moves.
We all keep pushing the same narrative forward. Eventually people will get it. And the other thing is we also need to like have fun right now and do things that are like interesting. And you said it just a second ago, where we're kind of being led astray by all these like crazy things. We do, like I said with the supplements a moment ago, right? Like you can dabble in some supplements that you think could be potentially helpful in the pursuit of what your long-term goal is. I just wouldn't get distracted by every new shiny object or, something that's like spinning around in your periphery. Is just keep your eye on the long game and the things that you choose to do now. Like maybe have fun, try the tart cherry juice or try the turmeric, or, do some kind of, interesting new exercise that might be fun, and, try that interval training or try the strength training or do your zone 2, whatever. Right. But do it in the pursuit of what your long-term goal is, rather than sort of just, like squirrel every time something that comes up. It's never going to end. Like, we're going to keep going. There's going to be things forever.
Exactly. Rachel, I feel like the time flew by. I could listen to you talk all day, but I know I have to let you go. So maybe can you tell people the best way to get more of your valuable insights? Where can they learn more about you and everything that you have to share?
Well, I'm so grateful to have this conversation and to be able to share this information with your community. You can find me at Rachele Pojednic. So it's just my first and last name on the socials. I'm most active on Instagram and Threads. And you can also find me. I'm at my website, www.rachelepojednic.com. And if you're interested in more information, I have a small education company called Strong Process Education. So I've been a professor of nutrition and exercise physiology for the past 15 years, and I've built out a bunch of courses for people in the wellness space. So if you are in the wellness space and you're looking for good evidence-based information, you can check out strongprocess.com. And we've got a bunch of courses that are up there that are all accredited for your certification. So if you're a health coach or you're a personal trainer, you can use them as CEUs. So we've got a general nutrition. We've got one on supplementation and exercise. We've got one on the gut-brain connection, which is always hot. We've got one coming out on recovery, on allergies. So all of these things that are really hot topics, I just really lay it out for you and give you what the evidence is. So that's at strongprocess.com.
Amazing. I want to take all those. I can't wait to hear. I should get an IgG test and take all the foods out of my diet, and how that's not the thing to do.
Don't do it.
Oh my gosh. You are a delight, and you're so brilliant. So we'll definitely link everything in the show notes, and people can reach out and learn more. And I've already just followed you on Instagram today, and I can't wait to follow you more. And please, anytime if you want to jump back on the show, if you have something else coming out or just anything you want to chat about, come on back. We'd love to have you.
Oh, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. And thanks for indulging me in my 96-year-old longevity plan.
You set the dream. Take care. I'll talk to you next time.
Thanks so much.